having lost the patriotic rulers in the freedom fight of 1857, there was a serious lack of leadership in India. And Britishers used this time to inculcate British values in the elites, and they transformed the Varna system into a rigid and regressive caste system by 1910. This divide and rule policy unfortunately worked, and people even started exploiting each other. And by this time, the European war came around, and they forced and incentivized people in distant land to fight their wars. And thus it became a world war instead of just a European war. And countries like India was forced and even incentivized, we'll get into that later, to not only send their men, but also finance the war. Not voluntarily, of course, but by illegal gift transfers that the servants of the British Crown did on behalf of Indian people. The incentive for India to fight the World War I was that the Britishers would move out, but they did not keep their promises. People talk about the depression that was caused in Europe after the World War I, but I find it very hard to imagine the lives of my forefathers whose wealth was drained out to finance a foreign war. And so the freedom movement in India intensified after that. And soon after, even the World War II came around, and India was again forced to send not just the men, but also finance the war, which was born out of the uncivilized ways of Europe. However, this time around, Indians positioned themselves on all fronts, from a peaceful revolution at home to fighting for the Britishers and also fighting for the Britishers' enemy. And India did get freedom at the end of it. However, India lost a large part of its fertile land to the designs of Anglos, and it was termed as Pakistan. And as the Britishers were going out, they again reverted back to the default setting and started to loot the temple deities or the goals or the wealth left behind by the Indian rulers. Whatever they could grab their hands on, they took it and ran like a true thief. And so it's truly a miracle that they weren't murdered on their way out. And thus, Europe, and specifically the Anglosphere, was industrialized and developed. Estimates put it that India went from 27% of world's GDP when the Britishers entered to 3% of the world's GDP when they had to exit. An estimate of $50 trillion of departure. And so there's a lesson in here, and that is to have more weapons than gold and to use them disproportionately on every enemy without compassion.